Hello, guys. Welcome back to a new episode of Real Estate Conversations with Harsh. Today, we have Ali Nazarian. He's a real estate developer, a coach with a background in engineering and certification in a net zero homes. So he builds homes. He started building homes as a net zero, which focuses on sustainability and energy efficiency. So since 2016, he has gained experience in land development, which focuses on purpose-built rentals, especially like the multifamily properties. And he currently owns and manages assets of about $17 million. And his portfolio spans across Canada, which is in Ontario, Alberta, and New Brunswick. So welcome, Ali Nazarian. Sorry, I forgot the name of the company. It's Ecolux Development.
Yes.
Welcome, Ali.
Yeah.
How have you been?
Thanks for having me here. I've been great. Yeah, it's summer. I don't know when this is going to be released, but it's summer now, and
Yes.
Yeah, it's always good.
Absolutely. Awesome. So Ali, talk to us about your story, how you got into real estate. I know you did some certification and your background is into engineering, but engineering is not land development. So you got into land development and now you are on to some bigger stuff. So give us a brief about what you like, how you got into Canada and how you started into land development.
Yeah. So you kind of like had the overall story there, but yeah, my background is in engineering. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, but since I was a kid, I always enjoyed watching houses being built. It was quite fascinating for me when there's a piece of dirt and there's materials and whatnot, and somebody put their imagination together and create a home for someone that they will live there and they'll create memories and whatnot. And so that always was at the back of my mind. Sometimes I joke I should have become a civil engineer and not a mechanical engineer. But when you go to school, you're young, you're like, oh, okay, what's the difference, one or the other? But so I always had the passion. But in 2014, 15, when I was living in Edmonton, Alberta, uh, Edmonton was going through a transformation, and the city was really promoting infill developments. And for those who don't know, infill development is like when you basically demolish an old house or a structure on the lot, and you build something bigger or more units on that same lot. So it's called an infill development. So City of Edmonton was really promoting that. They wanted to revitalize the downtown core, and again, that caught my attention. I started looking into it and actually learned a few things from just the material that City of Edmonton was putting out. In 2015, there were some ups and downs in the oil and gas industry in Alberta, and so I started looking at doing other things on the side, and building homes became apparent to me that because I had the passion for it. So started looking into that and learning about investing in real estate in Canada. My family had a little bit of portfolio, but nothing like sophisticated investing. So started looking into that. Nothing happened really at that point, but in 2016 I started investing myself. Bought a condo in Toronto that I was doing midterm rentals on it, furnished rentals. And in 2017, I eventually pulled the trigger and bought a piece of land, and I started building a house for myself, pretty much.
Okay.
Or at least that's what I told the bank. So I got a construction mortgage, and I did some project management in my day job. So kind of used that project management skills to become my own GC. And so I built a house. Decided to put a secondary suite in the basement, went to the city and asked them how I can do that. They said, you got to fill up these forms. We're going to send letters to the neighbors. I later realized that's called a minor variance because the zoning didn't actually allow secondary suites. But yeah, I ended up building that. And when it came to selling it, market was still down in Alberta. So I decided to rent it. And that's where I kind of realized the power of building purpose-built rentals. I saw the positive cash flow and decided to continue that, and moved to Ontario in 2019. Spent a year or so trying to do the same thing here, but realized the numbers don't work in Ontario quite in Alberta. So then I got down the rabbit hole of land development, like severing land off from an existing property, finding creative ways to basically create land at a cheaper price, so then the numbers would work. And that basically got me started in land development per se, and not just like house development, housing development. Like
Yes.
building and development are kind of like two separate things, but we can get into that later.
Yes. Okay, so that's quite a good background, and now you're on to some bigger stuff. I wanted to ask you about the last part that you just mentioned, right, where you were stating that you were doing it for the house, you did a minor variance, and now you are completely into bigger land, and you found a cheaper way to create that land or the opportunity from the land. So tell us a little bit more about that. What do you mean by like a cheaper way of like severing the land and then doing it, or something else?
Yeah, so that you got it right. That severance is one of the options, subdivision severance. So technically speaking, when we say land development, it's when you do something to the land to increase its value, increase its
Yes.
function, or basically you make some changes, you add value. So in contrast with when you're doing flipping or some other methods in real estate investing, let's take flipping. You take an old house, you do some work to it, you increase its value. So you're forcing appreciation.
Yes.
In that sense, it's easier to imagine because you're physically changing something. With land, sometimes there's no physical change to the land. You're just changing how it can be used or what's allowed to be built on that site.
Yes.
And severance is basically what we call when you take a piece of land and you split it to two. Sometimes you can create more lots from one single lot, and we call that subdivision if it's like 3 and more. And the great example of subdivision is when people take a big piece of land, like a couple of acres, and they create like maybe 10, 20, 30, 300, 400 lots for houses. And that's what we know as
Yes.
subdivisions. So that's what I'm referring to. And the reason I'm saying it was a cheaper way to create land is when if I take a piece of land or a property that is on a larger or extra large double lot or corner lot, has a big extra land, and
Yes.
I split that land and keep the original house, a lot of the value is in the structure that's on the land. So let's, for example, I buy a piece of land or a piece of property for $500,000. It has a single family property on it. If I sever off half of that land, that property will probably lose, say, like $50,000 to $75,000 of its value because now it has a small land. But
Yes.
say like it loses $75,000, I spend $25,000 on consultants fees and whatnot to sever off that land. Now that new piece of land has costed me $100,000.
Yes.
Most likely that same land on the market would be worth 150 to
200,000. Yes, or more.
or more. So
It is
now
if
that
it
I
is
go and
completely
build,
approved. Yes.
exactly. Now if I want to go and build a house on it, I will have a little bigger cushion with my cost.
Yes.
Because it's really hard to like save cost on construction. Like there's only so much you can save. The material cost we can't control. We all
Yes.
know what happened during COVID, that fluctuates, goes up and down. So what you can really control is how much you're paying for the land. That's good and bad. If you're trying to sell your land, that's where people will try to negotiate it down because that's one thing they can control. But if you can create the land or a lot or a building lot, or increase the density of what is allowed to be built on that site, you're creating appreciation, you're forcing the appreciation in the land. And that's what we call land development.
Yes.
A portion of land development is like you have the land and you just go and create a vision for what can be built on it. You get the permits, some places they call it a site plan, basically application or site plan approval or development permit. It's basically creating a vision, and then
Yes.
from there you have to go and get a building permit. And
Yes.
those are all different exit points in the land development or in the
Yes.
development process. You can just do the land development and pass it to someone that wants to build it, or you
Yes.
can take it all the way to the end.
Yes, and building is an expensive process, right? Building is really, really expensive, especially now when we have labor shortages and the
Exactly.
materials are it's through the roof right now, the material costs, right? Okay, so that's good info. And now, from a land development perspective, like if somebody is just starting up in land development, right, and they identified a piece of land, in short, like what are the stages of land development? Let's say the land has been identified. You have not bought it, but an identified land that, yes, this looks good. Now, what will you do as part of due diligence and then taking it through the approval?
Now, that's a great question. I would actually go one step back. And when we
Okay.
say we've identified this as an opportunity or potential development, land development opportunity, I want to kind of break that down a little bit. So when we say we identify that, it kind of ties into the due diligence as well. We always want to look at what can we do with this land? Is there anything more we can do?
Yes.
To show contrast, if you go to a new subdivision and you buy that piece of land, there's not much you can do with it to add value to the land.
Yes.
You can go build on it if you're a builder, and you might be able to capture the difference between your overall cost and the market value if the market works in your favor. But you need to be sure that you can control your construction cost and make sure you know what you're doing.
Yes.
But if you're looking at land development, first of all, you got to decide what strategy would be applicable in that piece of land. So, is this a severance? Is this a subdivision? Are we doing rezoning? Rezoning is basically changing how the land can be used. Are we basically just getting a site plan approval? Because in some cities, it's difficult to get site plan approval. So, there's value add to go through that process. So, you get rewarded for the work that you have done. So at the end of the day, you're always getting rewarded for the work you're doing. If what you're doing is easy, there will be less value for it. If it's
Yes.
more difficult, it's that you go to downtown Toronto, you get a
Yes.
site plan approval. There's a lot of value in that because you have to
Yes.
jump a lot of hoops to get that.
Oh,
If you go
yes.
to small town in Alberta, it's probably not very difficult to get a development permit, as they call it there, which is the equivalent of site plan approval in Toronto. So there's not a lot of value. Anyone who wants to build it, they can go and get that themselves. As an example, that minor variance that I got to add a secondary unit, they call it,
Yes.
secondary dwelling unit in the basement in Alberta. It was basically a form that I filled up. They sent a letter to the neighbors. Nobody said anything. It was approved in 3 weeks. I wouldn't expect anyone to pay me extra money because I went through that process because anyone could do it.
Yes.
But in contrast, we just completed a rezoning in Calgary where we assembled 5 properties. Took us 4 months to negotiate all that, and another year to go through and like lots of planning, lots of talking to consultants, and we just got approved for a 24-story tower on that site. Now that we can expect, a good amount of appreciation for that.
Oh,
So
wow.
to answer your question, we first have to look at, I guess, for those who have read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I love one of the principles is always to start with the end goal, with the end in mind. What are you
Yes.
trying to get out of it? Is this where you can do a single lot severance? Is it a corner lot? You can sever it off. Obviously, as part of your due diligence, you have to check with the zoning,
Yes.
contact the city planning department, and ask them what is the process, because every city has a different process on how they go about basically doing a severance or rezoning,
Yes.
whatever strategy you're trying to do. So knowing what you can get, and always, always, always make sure you have, I would say, minimum 3 exit strategies.
Yes.
So for those who are starting, and I personally still favor properties that generate some kind of income. It could be, depending on your situation, you could accept some negative cash flow. But as investors, we always say we want to have a positive cash flow, or at least break even and not be out of pocket. Because you will have some costs for development and consultants and whatnot. That's an investment you can make. But the property ideally should be able to carry itself and pay for itself. So I would say if somebody is starting in this field, always look at properties that have an existing house or structure, or it could be something else, right? It could be anything on it that can generate some income to help you carry that property. Because one of the risks in land development is timelines. They're often very, very difficult to predict. Because it's sometimes a public process. Every city has different processes change, so it's hard to predict. So it's critical, but very important to make sure you can carry the property with the carrying costs like taxes and maintenance and all that stuff. So I would say that's one of the things to look at. So one exit strategy should be the property on its own should still be an investment. Acceptable investment. Your second strategy could be, hey, I'm trying to get a 2-unit on the additional lot that I create. That's the ideal scenario. That's my option one, and sell that to a builder. Another exit option should be, hey, I should go and build it all the way to the end and sell it. The other one would be, I build it and the market is not good. Can I rent this and carry it and still make sense of it? And then the worst case scenario, like I said, could be, hey, I just bought a piece of property that I'm happy to keep it in the long run. So right there were 4 exit strategies that people can think about when they're dealing with the land development strategy.
Yes, and I know it sounds like a little easy on the out, right? When we're talking, it sounds a little easier that, okay, we can do this, we can do that, we can do this. But land development, when I'm dealing with my clients and like developers, it's the most riskiest and the most rewarding business, right? There have been times where people have bought lands thinking that they can do this, and halfway through the process, or sometimes even like 3/4 of the process, and then they come to know, oh, this is something which is stopping, and now this cannot be done, right? So this is risky. So people always complete your due diligence. My suggestion is always leverage on experience, right? Maybe partner up with developers like you, right? Or somebody right? That who is already in the game, who knows things, and who can actually guide in the start, so that you're not shelling out money like crazy and not bleeding on a property, right? So that's my suggestion, and have them partner up. I don't think any developer would say no, that I don't want to partner up, just because maybe the opportunity is not there, and then they say no because they already know that it'll not work. So
yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Like partnering with someone that's a little more experienced and to learn and how it's done. The power team, we always say that's critical. Sure, you know the right people.
Absolutely.
Consultants, urban planners, architects, and there are free resources. Contact the city planners, planning department. They always have some good thoughts. And like you mentioned, the due diligence in land development, it's absolutely critical.
Yes.
It is important in all strategies, but it's extra important in land development because you're basically putting your bets on something that is dependent on a third-party approval. But we call it approval risk. That's the biggest. When you're doing a flip, you don't have approval risk. Nobody can stop you from renovating your house. The market might shift. The budget might, be not exactly what you thought. The timelines might get extended, but nobody's can stopping you altogether from doing what you're trying to do. But when you're doing land development, you're often dealing with approvals from mostly, well, I would say always from government bodies or municipalities. and there is no sure way in those things. It may or may not get approved. A lot of them, like if you're doing a rezoning or a minor variance, you're going to committee of adjustment. It's a public process. I've had cases where I was doing a severance, and just neighbors don't like it, so they come and oppose it. Committee of adjustment was supposed to approve the severance and the minor variances. They obviously represent the neighborhood and the community, and they simply say it's not a fit, so they'll turn it down. So now you're basically stuck. There are ways to mitigate it. We ended up going to what they call in Ontario, it's called Ontario Land Tribunal. So it's basically going to court. You have to get a lawyer, specialized lawyer that specializes in basically planning law, the land planning bylaws. And you basically go to court and make your case. In our case, we were lucky it got approved because we had a strong case. Again, having the right people on
your team. Yes.
And
yes, that's an excellent point. This is what I have seen mostly happens. And then what happens is land development actually gets a bad name, right?
Yeah.
This is bad. This will not work, because they had the wrong team, or they thought that they'll be able to do it and they never leveraged on others' experience. That's where things get difficult. So,
and the other thing about land development is it's often political. You may not think about it, but it is a political thing.
Okay.
So it really depends on the political climate. Say like when we go, and this is again from experience, you're going to a public process, and you want the committee of adjustment, which is basically a committee in each city that looks at what we call minor variances. If you have a variance from the zoning bylaw, which let's say it says your front yard setback should be 7 meters and you're at 6 meters.
Yes.
So you're not meeting the bylaw, so you need a minor variance, as we call it, and so you go through a public process. This committee of adjustment members, a lot of them are council members, a lot of them are public figures. So if there's an election coming up, you can be sure that they're gonna take the residents' side, even if they know that you're adding more housing to the market, the housing crisis and whatnot. But at the end of the day, a lot of times they have to do what is going to get them reelected the next election round. Same thing goes if you're doing a bigger stuff and you're doing a rezoning and it goes to actually city council. Political climate, it's a really important thing to look at as part of your due diligence. Does this city council is pro-development? Are they pro-growth? What is the political climate? Right now, everybody's talking about housing crisis, but depends on where you are. Their interpretation is different. Like we have the NIMBYism, as we call it, like not in my backyard, very, very strong in Ontario. But you go to Alberta, it's not the same thing. New Brunswick, where we have another development project, there is somewhat there, but politicians react to that differently. So it is like another complexity in land development, especially if we're doing larger projects. You really have to understand the political climate around it.
Yes, and I do understand. Votes change things a lot, right? And especially now because next year we have elections. So maybe it's not the right time for every kind of opportunity, right? In land development.
Yeah, land development right now, because there's housing shortage, if you're putting new units on the market, there's generally support for it. We just had our council public hearing for our, again, that rezoning in Calgary for the 24-story towers. And listening to the council and with the other applications, there's such a shortage that they are willing to give concessions for getting more units on the market to basically help with the housing crisis. So I guess it's probably a good time to be a developer right now in Canada, because the mentality, the public perception of developers is changing a little bit.
Yes. Very good, very good. And I've also heard now there are more subsidies and there are more much more support for any kind of new housing, especially that affordability section. Right. I
Absolutely.
know you do it in sustainability and energy efficiency, and we are going to jump on that next. But on the affordability section, I know there's too much push, and now
Yeah.
there are people and developers and builders now getting attracted towards that to build those kind of houses, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like at the end of the day, we all want to make a positive impact in
Yes,
where we live.
yes,
Affordability is a complex topic, uh, but yeah, there are a lot of incentives for that, and it often requires like some creativity to create,
yes,
affordable units and affordability in the buildings. But there are incentives out there.
yes,
Definitely incentivizes that. And to add to your point, adding more units, especially rental units,
yes.
there is the climate, the political climate is in favor of creating more rental units.
Yes, yes, because that's been the hype for, I guess, last 2 years now, and especially the more and more immigrants that are pouring in every
Absolutely.
year. Like last year, it was like 1.2 million.
Yep.
I completely agree that that's the political climate which really favors the land developers and builders who are putting out extra units. So
Exactly.
uh, before jumping on the sustainability, because we're adding on extra units, I know I went there at your property at the London one, right? That you're doing exactly the same thing where you're adding 5 more units to that nineplex, right? So
Yes.
that is a fascinating project, and I have
Thank
not seen anyone do like add more units to existing building. I've seen them demolish and rebuild from start. Like someone I know in Toronto, they just had a land, like a big lot. They severed it into two, and each lot then they created four units, and then because it was a deep lot
you.
at the back, they created two laneway suites. So now,
Beautiful.
instead of one house, that there was only one house there, and now there are 10 units. And
Nice.
guess what, like they did not have to go through the approval process because Toronto came out with that bill where if up to fourplex you don't need any
That's
approvals, right? So they severed in four and two, right? So
nice. That's
they didn't
beautiful.
have to. So one unit, one house was converted into 10.
That's
Wow,
awesome.
was yeah, that was really awesome.
Yeah,
And
that's
brand new
definitely
build.
that. Yeah, that's the direction. Like more
Yes,
units, more housing. Absolutely, the multiplex bylaw in Toronto now allows
yes.
4 units without development charges and an additional garden suite as well.
Yes, so that's what they did, and I was baffled, like what they were able to accomplish with and just one lot, right? In just one
Yeah.
lot, and
Sure.
they're able to provide housing for 10. I would say like 8 families and two bachelors or two professionals, right?
Yeah.
Which is like
That's
almost
10
25.
housing instead of one. Yeah.
Yes, and that's around like 25 to 30 people
Nice.
in just one lot, and what they created. Wow.
That's amazing.
Yes. So now jumping on to that sustainability and energy efficiency, especially in the purpose built market that you are into, right? Though that's your prime focus. So, what kind of sustainability and energy efficiency that you look for? Plus, like you are more focused into purpose built, right? I have seen most of the developers that I work with, they are more focused on townhouses and building big communities rather than doing a purpose built rental,
Mhm.
which you are. So that's going to be a little exciting for me as well,
Cool.
what you're trying to do. So, yes, let's discuss that or talk to us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, multifamily and purpose-built rentals, like I said, when I discovered the power of purpose-built rentals,
Yes.
and the basically aiming for cash flow. And multifamily is the best asset class in real estate in
Yes.
terms of being basically recession proof, being a long-term asset. It's less, less susceptible to like tenants not paying rents and whatnot. Because now you have more units. Imagine if you have one single family home, you have one tenant. If they stop paying you, that's 100% of your income. But in a
Yes.
duplex, if one tenant doesn't pay you, that's 10%. In a 100-unit building, if 5 tenants don't pay you, that's 5% of your income being
Yes.
affected. So it's a risk mitigation, it's a long-term wealth creation, and I absolutely love multifamily. So what I've tried to do is to basically bring these two together, the land development and the multifamily. So doing land development for purpose-built multifamily rentals. And so those are the bulk of the projects I'm working on. On the
Yes.
sustainability and energy efficiency front, it's something that I've always been passionate about. I'm against wasting anything in general.
Yes.
Wasting energy and knowing how hard it is these days to produce energy. We may not always notice it in our day-to-day lives, but coming from the industry, I know it's getting more and more difficult every year to generate electricity and just produce energy in total. So in 2017 or 2016, when I was kind of starting to get into building homes and whatnot, uh, I wanted to incorporate that into what I was doing. Using my mechanical engineering background, energy efficiency was the part I understood the most about sustainability. So when we say sustainability, is environmental sustainability mostly, and there are different aspects of that. There is water consumption. There is sustainable materials. There's embodied carbon, the carbon footprint, even like the process, like how much carbon was generated in the process of producing those materials that we are using. You will see there's like shift towards using more wood than steel, because steel and even concrete, steel and concrete are very energy intense to produce, and they're very carbon intense. So using more wood is more sustainable, and wood is it's a more sustainable material as well.
So wood, like you're saying, just the foundation, just like a house. So the entire building on wood?
You
Or
could actually in Alberta, you can build your foundation out of preserved wood, but there's a concept it's becoming very popular, and they call it mass timber. So
okay.
even like building high rises or mid rise buildings with completely out of wood, and these are like
Wow.
engineered timber. So there's a few of those being built in Toronto right now. I think the record is like a 15-story building that's built out of mass timber. Don't quote me on it, but it's like mid-rise building.
Wow.
But my focus has been on energy efficiency, which mostly relates to mechanical systems. And again, given my background, that's the part I understood the most. So I've
Yes.
been focusing on that, lowering the energy consumption of the building. A couple of years ago, I went and did a course in net zero energy homes,
Mhm.
a certification in that to really understand how it works. And I'm trying to implement some of those into the multifamily space as well. When we do renovations, where like the ones we are doing, like the 9 unit in Oshawa, or the conversion, the 9 unit to 14 units in London, we are implementing some of these energy efficiency features. And basically what it is that you try to lower the energy consumption of the building, and try to preserve the energy as much as you can, and try to use more sustainable sources of energy. When we say sustainable sources of energy, we mean like electricity in Ontario comes from a lot of renewable and nuclear, which is considered clean. So we call it like clean grid. So the grid in Ontario is quite clean.
Yes.
In other provinces, there's different. There are stats available on that. But so converting from using gas to electricity, you're basically making it more sustainable. We just
Okay.
renovated a sixplex in New Brunswick, where it was using oil, and it was a very old oil furnace,
Yes.
very inefficient. It wasn't good for our performer, and it was also not good for the environment.
Yes.
So now we got rid of that, and we have installed heat pumps and electric baseboard heaters and electric hot water tanks. So now the building is what we call electrified, and the grid is clean in New Brunswick. So our modeling from the energy advisors shows that we have reduced the greenhouse gas emissions by, I believe, about 50%,
Wow.
and improved the
That's
energy efficiency of the building by about 42%. So
Wow.
it's making a great impact on the environment.
Yes.
But now CMHC has a program called MLI Select program.
Yes.
A lot of people have heard about it. It
Yes.
actually allows you, if you meet certain criteria on
Yes.
affordability or sustainability and energy efficiency, it will allow you to go up to 95% loan to value and
Yes.
year amortization with a
Yes.
reduced debt coverage ratio. And for our New Brunswick project, although we spent almost double the amount of money we would have spent on a normal cosmetic renovation to do a
Yes.
deeper energy retrofits and upgrades, we are able to get all of that money out at the end. So these are some of the incentives that are now available to do more energy efficiency.
And I agree to this point. Absolutely. Absolutely agree. I can agree more because the MLI Select, because we also do mortgages, right, as a team. So what we have seen in mortgages now is they're a little bit lenient, and especially on the CMHC side, they're a little bit lenient on this side, and plus. We are seeing more, especially in the Toronto market, where the affordability really does not work out of those the three pieces that MLI Select is focused on. So we have seen more and more projects forcing themselves to do energy efficiency plus the sustainability in Toronto market, like in the GTA. And CMHC is a little bit lenient. They'll go below their normal DCR value in some cases, not by much, but they'll do a point here and there plus leniency if they see the project is viable and they believe in the person who is buying it. They can prove it and they'll do it. So we have seen some really good deals happening on that space in that space, especially from the MLI Select program. This seems to be the go-to program for for everyone right now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Given the current interest rates.
Yeah, exactly, with the interest rates and whatnot. And there are rebates as well.
Yes.
Every city, every province have some rebates for energy efficiency.
Yes.
All part of the climate action that Canada has rolled out or enrolled in.
Yes.
And it takes a little bit more work, takes a little bit more digging and spending a
Yes.
little bit more time. But there are incentives, and it's also, doing the right thing for the world.
Yes, it is. And I couldn't agree more. This is the need of the hour, especially with what all is going on in the climate side. Like we're experiencing the hottest month in the human history this year, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be the hottest day. So it's like bizarre. So yes, we really need to focus on climate as a species, right? As a human species. So not just investors. But yes, that is really good. I wanted to jump on to your current projects, right? Where I know you're doing that 24 big development, which you're now also thinking of trying to build by yourself, the entire 24 unit. And I know the London property that I was talking about, the 5 units, there's 9 units that you're adding, 5 more units. Now comparing the two, right? The 24 in Alberta and the 9 to 14 in Ontario. Do you see some differences? I know the timeline is different, but where do you find the more support? It's Ontario or it's in Alberta?
I would say Alberta is an easier climate to work in. There's more support. There's more willingness to make it easier for developers to bring units to the market.
Yes.
So yeah, it's easier. Like Ontario is taking some steps in the right direction, but there's still a lot of red tapes and a lot of hoops you have to jump through per se to get things done. Even with our 5-unit addition in London, we have some comments back from the city that sometimes you're scratching your head as like, is this really absolutely necessary? Like, it's just making it harder for like the gain from those. Like sometimes you understand that the reason behind some of the requests, but when you think about the risk and reward and the gain and loss here, it's hard to make sense. So some of them are outdated regulations. Yeah, Alberta, all in all, it's
Much better.
more pro development and more pro growth.
And you're also doing this in New Brunswick, the similar kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you are going to build that as well, or can you talk a little bit more about that project?
Yeah. So the Alberta one, we are looking at all options. Like I said, you always have to have multiple
exits.
And multiple exits. But yeah, the New Brunswick, we are also looking at multiple options, but our intention is to build it. So the sixplex was on a 2.5-acre land.
Yes.
We renovated the sixplex. We're doing the refinance. Again, back to my point, that's going to help us carry the property, break even, and be a little bit positive. Now we're going through a rezoning and subdivision of the land, and we're looking at adding about 60 units on that one. That's also another great project that we're working on. Yeah, we have a 9 units in Oshawa that we're renovating, doing energy efficiency upgrades, MLI select exit. In London, we're adding that floor with 4 units and then converting the laundry room into one. So adding 5 units to 14 units. There's lots on the go for sure.
Yes, well, we wish you best of luck for all the projects that you're doing. And I know we keep on connecting at different events, and we hope to see you again soon. And once you're done with these projects, or you're looking for any kind of help, do let us know, and we'll be there. It's always good to connect with you, Ali, not just here, but over the phone or any at the event. I find you such a nice person to connect with.
Thank you.
I really thank you for your time today, and thank you for being on the show. And we'll talk soon again.
Thank you, Harsh. Thanks for having me here. Thanks for your kind words. And yeah, it's always a pleasure meeting you and chatting with you. You have a lot of great insights. You've been in the industry for a long time, and yeah, look forward to connecting with you in the future as well. If anybody wants to find me, Ali Nazarian on Facebook, Ecolux Developments on Instagram, or ecoluxdevelopments.com is my website.
Yeah, we'll be posting the social handles when we post the podcast on social media. So we'll be posting all your social handles there.
That's awesome. Thank you, Harsh. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming on board.